was saying, we've been discussing how this year is wild, and so we just want you to know we're here, and we're excited to be working with you guys and cheering for you and supporting you through this year. Do you want to go?
Yeah.
The first scene. Okay. We lost Wendy, but she'll be no doubt hopping on in just a bit.
Yes.
Our year coordinator from Utah.
So, I think she's first, though, isn't she?
Oh yeah, she's first. Well, we can skip ahead. Yeah. So today we're going to be talking about the research process, online research strategies. We're going to be talking about how to evaluate resources, and our featured category today is exhibits. And that's going to be a fun one to talk about with the new submission guidelines. So let's scooch along to scooch, keep scooching.
We'll go back to all this, I promise.
We'll go back when Wendy hops back on. So let's start by talking about online research strategies. In our course, we have teachers in every division, youth, junior, and senior division. So we wanted to start by letting you know about student-friendly search engines, where these are a great resource for younger students who are learning how to search. A lot of these search engines do not have ads, and they restrict inappropriate content. So this is a great way to kind of send students off to be researchers and working independently. Christine, do you want to do the next one?
Yeah.
I recently heard students referred to as Generation Google, and it made me laugh so hard because that's so apropos to students right now. So we kind of want to encourage you to work with that savvy that students have developed in Google and help them learn to be power searchers. We've shared with you in the course some tips for how to do advanced searching within Google, and just a few examples over here. Students want to Google everything, but you can help them find information in a specific website or domain. You can help them search for keywords or for primary sources, and you can help students exclude a word from their search. I love this example. Alexander Hamilton minus Broadway would be a good search term. And there's a bunch more in the search, but we really recommend helping students learn how to make Google a more effective and precise researching tool as they're getting going on their own. We wanted to make sure that you know about some really helpful and important digital resources. Obviously, National History Day, we're always encouraging students to branch out from online research, but this year is a little different. I don't know how it is in all of our states. Here in Boise, Idaho, where I am located, public libraries have not been open since March, and I don't know when they will reopen. So we're just gonna really help kids learn about all of the awesome digital content out there. And one of the silver linings in our COVID crisis is that a lot of institutions have been able to use their staff to beef up their digital resources and to help connect students to more of their collections. So some important places where you can help students get started researching is the Library of Congress. Library of Congress has really awesome digital collections, and they also sponsor Chronicling America, which has thousands of newspapers through all of our history, so that students can do research looking for their topic and how it was covered in the news in every city, small town, all over the country. NARA is another great source, the National Archives and Records Administration. They have this website, Docs Teach, where teachers can actually take information from or take take sources that the National Archives have, and you can build lesson plans and curate collections for your students to take a look at. And Docs Teach has a page specifically for National History Day students about the theme this year, and they help connect students directly to primary sources and topics that relate to the theme for this year. WorldCat is another great online resource for students doing world history topics. The AP Archives is another great one. You can find all of the archives from the Associated Press. Gale Historical Newspapers has a lot of awesome newspapers, even older than what you might find in Chronicling America and more diverse. NHD also works really hard to build relationships with partner organizations like the White House Historical Association, the World War I Commission, and lots of other groups. And we have a partners page, which I have linked here, where you can see dozens of partners and the web pages they've created for this year's theme, and they help share their collections and their materials. The NHD Partner Resource is a great place to send students who are trying to figure out a topic too. They can get a lot of great ideas looking at primary sources that have been specifically chosen for this theme. My personal favorite is the Smithsonian Learning Lab. I'm a huge, huge fan of the Smithsonian, and in their Learning Lab, you can find access to all of the Smithsonian artifacts, photographs. They have really high resolution photos, so you can spin artifacts around. They will cite their material for you with a click of a button. And they just, the Smithsonian, I mean, it's amazing what money can do for your website. But if you haven't had a chance to check out the Smithsonian Learning Lab, again, there you can create your own lesson plans, and you can see lesson plans that other teachers have created by pulling objects from the Smithsonian collections to help your students engage with primary sources. So do any of you out there have any other suggestions for digital resources that have proven to be really fruitful for your student researchers? Feel free to put it in the chat or unmute yourself. We're not shy here.
In Nevada, our state library subscribes to a research database called ABC Clio, and it's really it's got a Wikipedia feel to it, so kids tend to be okay using it. So if you're in Nevada, or if you're in Idaho and Utah, you should also check out and see if you could get access. They may be offering some free access for the school year. It's worth looking into, but I know that was one of the places I was able to steer kids to when they were really stuck in Wikipedia. And not that Wikipedia is a horrible place to get started, but often it would lead them to places like the Library of Congress and send them to some really good places. So if you have access to ABC Clio, and check out your state library and archives, they often subscribe to a lot of databases, and they're available for all residents of the state, which is kind of cool.
Thanks, Christine. Stephanie put in the chat the Avalon Project. I'm not familiar with that one. Stephanie, do you mind telling us a bit?
It's through the Yale Law Library, and they have digitized, translated primary sources all the way back to the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Law Code of Hammurabi, and they're sorted by year.
Okay, great.
It was like one of the first places I found for primary sources.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephanie. I didn't know about that one. I'm definitely going to check that out and add it to my list.
Also, the Shoah Foundation has a lot of video resources on the Holocaust, and so does the Jewish Partisan Education Foundation.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks so much.
There are some terrific resources through Echoes and Reflections, which is a collaborative with Shoah and Yad Vashem and ADL. So tons of great stuff. I love knowing about the Avalon Project because we have kids who want to do something older, and it can be really tricky for them to find primary sources. So that's so helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much for all of those. Those are awesome. We also want to help connect you to online resources that are near and dear to your states. In my state of Idaho, the Idaho State Archives is working constantly to update their digital collections and make things more available to teachers and students. That's a great place to check out Idaho newspapers and big events that have taken place in Idaho. And they have a government records collection there too, so you can find any government records from any of the state agencies for the whole history of Idaho. The Idaho State Museum, which is the sponsor for NHD in Idaho, and I work there, they also have a lot of awesome connections on their website. One of them is the National History Day in Idaho Teacher Toolkit, which has a lot of resources to help you. I've been building an online resource categorical. It is divided up by topic, place in the world, and time period to help connect you with digital collections. So that's a great place for any of you guys, not just Idaho teachers. Christine, would you tell us a little bit about what Nevada has available?
Sure. I just quickly listed that our special collections departments at both UNLV and UNR are super happy to help History Day kids. They've been involved with our History Day program for a really long time, as well as our state library and archives, which I already mentioned, but you can also reach out to the archivists and the state librarians. So students can do that and get specific archival materials. Even though they're closed, they're still working. And so they're there. And the Nevada State Museum is also a sponsor of History Day in Nevada. So they have a lot of resources. So like the Springs Preserve down in Vegas. And then if you have a kiddo who wants to get into it, the Mob Museum is a great resource. And they love History Day. So I didn't mention that, but the Mob Museum down in Vegas, they're available statewide for kids. Actually, they're available nationwide. So Utah and Idaho teachers, if you have a student who wants to do anything on prohibition, on the mafia, on any of that stuff, the Mob Museum would love to help. And they have some pretty incredible primary sources, including the wall from the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Just saying. So that's just a couple of things that we have.
Cool. Wendy, can you tell us about Utah?
Yeah, it's very similar. We have a state archives that holds government documents, and I always try to remind people that it's not just birth and death certificates and marriage certificates. There's laws, there's governor's papers, there's legislative records. There's a lot more in there than you think in government docs. Kevin is reminding me about the Utah Digital Newspapers .org, which is just one of a lot of resources through the Division of State History and our partners. And then at pretty much every university in the state, there is a special collections library. And I do have resources on my website helping you figure out like if that university special collections might have something that's relevant for one of your topics. And then to not miss just about history of the American West are the Mountain West Digital Library, which is an online digital aggregator of digital collections from all over the Mountain West states. It's really great. And then the Denver Public Library Western History Department is also really exceptional for Western history materials. I mean, this is such a tiny list, but there's so much that we didn't put on the list. And once you start digging, you'll find things.
Yeah, if you have students who are interested in local history and you're kind of stumped on where to go, definitely reach out to your coordinator. We can help connect you with librarians or special collections that can really help your student. And I think right now, again, another one of the silver linings from COVID is that librarians are so eager and excited to help students who are working from home, and they're in your corner and have time and capacity to help when maybe they didn't before, when their campuses were swamped with students. So let us know if there's anything we can do to help connect you with those. Another question that we often get from teachers is, what about world history topics? It's so hard for students to find world history topics. And like Wendy mentioned earlier, that can be really tricky for students who are interested in looking, pre-20th century topics, because a lot of primary sources are not available or did not survive events in time. And so we have some tips for you. A great place to start is to look for national libraries, archives, and museums in the countries involved in the events that you're talking about. A good example of this is the British Library Digital Archives. A lot of British sources are subsidized by the government, and so they're available for free. All of their collections are available for free. The British Museum is another one. So those are great places, especially because the British, they're messing around all over the globe. So they have a lot of things that they've stolen and pillaged from other countries. So those are great places to look. Another example is at university and college libraries. Stephanie shared earlier about the Avalon Project out of Yale. Duke University has a Japanese studies archives. There's all kinds of universities and colleges that have special collections. So help your students know about these resources, help get them going if they're interested in world history, or if your content area is world history. Another great place to look is at places like the Wilson Center or the United Nations, or groups that are working with multiple nations. The Wilson Center has an amazing digital archive, not just related to the work of President Wilson, but anything that involves national security or world peace topics that were relevant to President Wilson and his 14-point plan. So you can find a lot of really cool sources out there if you keep digging. And again, we're always happy to help, and your school librarian is also happy to help connect you with these collections out there. Does anybody have any really cool sources that they would want to share, something that has been helpful to your students in the past? Feel free to unmute and share, or put it in the chat. It does feel like you're a treasure hunter a lot of the time. Presidential libraries, yes, Stephanie, that's another great one. The George W. Bush Presidential Library has a lot of great information about working with primary sources. So that's a good one. But like we said, don't give up, or don't let your students give up if there's a topic that they really care about and they've connected about, but they feel like they can't find anything. Keep digging and keep trying.
I have a question, just because as a teacher, this is a little bit overwhelming. Like, if you have 120 students, and I mean, I remember it was always a challenge, even just with our arts integration project, kind of getting all the ducks in a row. Exactly how much guidance do you give, or is it really dependent upon the students? I mean, is it something that you give sort of a general thing in the beginning and then one-on-one conferences, or
so
how do you manage it?
Yeah, there's a number of approaches. I would say in general, the law of thirds will apply to your student researchers, right? A third of them will be like, I got this, get out of my way. Let me go research. A third will need some guidance and some assistance, and a third will be totally clueless, lost, needing support. So if you have 120 kids, that's a lot, right? With National History Day, though, you are their guide. You're not doing the research for them. You're not in charge of getting each kid set on the right path. What you want to focus on instead is helping them develop research skills and instruct them on research skills. So when you send them off on their own, they can be more successful. So we've spent 10 minutes talking about places where you can look for primary sources. You might consider making your own few slides, or making a list, like a launching point that gives students a few places to get started and get trying. And then you can help students who need more specific guidance, or maybe keep sending them back to the resource that you provide to get them going. But I think you might be pleasantly surprised to see that another silver lining of COVID, focus on the positive, is that students are becoming so adept at navigating the internet and using tools that are available out there. So no, you should not be planning on holding the hands of 120 student researchers, but you do want to give them the skills to empower them to go off on their own and explore. So that's why we kind of talked about some of the like kid-friendly search engines, if you're working with younger students, so that you know they're safe working independently. We've talked about a few of the big sources and places where you can find things. And one more that we're gonna talk about is primary source collections. But yeah, you're launching them, sending them off to go do research on their own, and you're maybe being like the one that they can bounce problems off of if they're having a hard time. Does that make sense? Teachers, nod your head if you're feeling me. Okay, ooh, I got a thumbs up and a head nod. Perfect. Everyone else, I can only see your name. Perfect. Okay, so one more place that that we wanted to highlight for you is primary source collections. So we talked about this a little bit in a previous session, but if you are working with students who are working below grade level, or are ESL, ELL learners, or maybe are younger students, 4th, 5th, 6th graders, it can be extra challenging for them to find primary sources. So consider looking at primary source collections, or places where students have already have curated collections for you. I listed a few, got the Avalon Project in there. Thanks, Stephanie. I want to highlight one with you really quick, which is thinkport.org. Christine, will you click on that link? So Thinkport is a collaboration between Maryland Humanities, Maryland NHD, and Maryland Public Television. And they have created a vast collection of curated primary source kits that they call inquiry kits. So you can see here they have 4 sets of kits. Let's take a look at the World History Kit. They're based on time periods. So let's say you're teaching World Civ and you have kids who are really interested in revolutions, nationalism, imperialism. Will you click on that section? Thanks, Christine. And you'll find a bunch of different topics that fall in this time period in different countries. And let's take a look at like the United States gets Alaska. If you click on topic 4, this will pull up a collection of primary sources about this topic. They have thinking questions to help guide students before they even start looking at the primary source. And when you click on each primary source, it gives you a little description, and then it takes you to the home of that primary source. So this is a really great resource because students are finding primary sources that have already been put together. Then they're going to see where they live. So they are getting ideas of sources and places that they can research. This is also a great place to let students explore when they're looking for topics too. I love primary source collections because part of the magic of National History Day is that you can adapt it for your students. We're flexible and you can help them progress wherever they're starting. So consider using primary source collections if you're working with students who you want them to spend the bulk of their time analyzing the primary sources and thinking about them and crafting an argument rather than finding them in the first place. Okay, so we can go back to our slides. Any questions about any of the material we've covered? Okay, we're gonna scooch back in time, Wendy, to the research process with National History Day, and I'll turn things over to Wendy.
Wendy,
Okay.
do you want to share, or do you want me to stop share?
No, go ahead. You can do it.
Okay.
Yep. All right. So there is really an order of operations with doing research, and it's so important to start in the right place. And the right place to start your kids researching is with secondary sources. You absolutely should not go to primary sources until they have found some secondary sources, and you can set the benchmark, found credible secondary sources, and then they need to read them, and they need to start using their source tracking tools, whatever you're going to use. So the first two steps in my research process are start with secondary sources, build their knowledge of the context, and then we already talked about great places you can send them to find credible secondary sources, not just any old web article that they find on Google. We really want to direct them to places where they will be reading the work of scholars or experts. And then before you move to primary sources, make sure that you cement in that read and record step. And this is where, again, you need to teach the skills, like why do I need to keep track of my source tracking information? What's a bibliography anyway? Those concepts need to be introduced so that they understand why they have to write down the date and where they found it and the publisher and the author and all that information that they're going to need later. So that's learning that they need to do early in this process and do it before they move on to primary sources. If you have not heard of Noodle Tools, but you love databases, I'm just going to urge you to go look at Noodle Tools. Anyone in Utah can use it for free through UEN, and I would have to defer to Joanna and Christine about how free Noodle Tools is in their states. I know that supposedly there is an NHD option so that kids can access that for free, but it is such a great database system for creating a bibliography. They can keep their notes in that database. They can put all of their quotes.
Yeah, I think I used to use it for
terrific.
NHD. We'll have to send out the link. We'll find it for you all and we'll send it out.
And if you look at my website for NHD Utah, you will find we have a tutorial, like just a 25-minute tutorial on using Noodle Tools, but it is tremendous. If you feel like that's too big a lift, if you haven't used it before, use a paper tracking system or use a system that you like, but just introduce it early. And then I would also say in this read and record step, this seems to me to be a great time to have them draft their historical context paragraphs before they even move into the primary sources. Having a good sense of what else was going on in that time, how they're going to make it, which contexts are relevant for their topic, and having them do some digestion and processing of that information is only going to help them as they start primary source research. So I'm going to skip over the next step because we already really talked about that. And so this fourth step, after they've started finding materials, that's when you get to the analysis phase, where you can use a variety of tools. You can use the Library of Congress Observe, Question, Reflect tool. If you like Nhg, I feel like it depends on how old the kids you're working with are, if they've done anything like this before. I think Nhg has a really great model as well for source analysis, but pick one or two and practice with them, and then they'll be able to move into their own source analysis. I have a very friendly cat here tonight with me. And then the last step is encouraging them to keep digging. It's really easy for you to set a benchmark and say, okay, you've got to have 5 secondary sources and 3 of them have to be books. And I need you to find 5 primary source quotes. And there's nothing wrong. I actually have my a draft timeline built just exactly that way because I like that idea of those concrete benchmarks. But what you really want is to figure out how you're going to set the bar to motivate the kids that you are working with. Because when research starts to get fun, when they start, like, catch the scent and they start doing it on their own. And so you don't want to create a situation where everybody's just going to turn in the minimums. You really want to figure out how you're going to encourage them to keep digging and keep, finding new clues. All right, Christine. Okay. I find that, this quote came from an actual student at my state contest because I always survey them. And the question was something like, what would it have helped you to know before you started your History Day project. And this student said, I wish I had known what a primary source was. So I think that's an important place to start, because we can't assume that they learned it in their class last year. Even if you know the teacher, it's good to review. So let me hear from you guys in the chat. How do you explain to kids what a primary source is? Or if you talk about different kinds of primary sources, what are some different kinds of primary sources that they might be working with? Such as a newspaper, or a letter, or a diary, things like that, right? All right, Gerald says it's an account of a witness who experienced an event. That is a kind of primary source. A source made by someone who experienced or lived through the event. I say the same and give examples. I love the idea of giving lots of examples, because it's too easy to get in the letters, diaries, newspapers rut and not think more broadly. So
I used to tell my students that if the source could say, been there, done that, then it was primary. Which I know is like...
Let me toss out a source, and you tell me what this would be. What about political cartoons? Are those primary?
They can be. They don't have to be, though.
If made at the time. Nicole, ding, 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 ding. Yes. Paintings, photos, artifacts. Yes, 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 yes. So the thing that really tells you whether a source is primary or not is not how close the person was to the event. It's not whether or not they were an eyewitness. It's when that source was created, because a lot of history is built on social and cultural discourse. And so that's where political cartoons are primary sources of debates about politics and other things that are going on at that time. And so I really want you to step away from that notion of it had to be somebody who was part of the battle, to when that source was created and if it's a relevant source to the topic that the kids are working on. Now, for a secondary source, how do we define what a good secondary source is for our students? It's not just when it was written, because secondary sources are always written after the fact, looking back. But for us, what we want to emphasize is who wrote that. Are they credible? Are they an expert? Is it Crazy Granny who has a website? Because we really don't want Crazy Uncle Ed appearing in our secondary source lists, right? So the secondary source discussion really does need to focus on credibility. Okay, I love that you brought up bias or safe tooth video made by a 5th grader. See, yeah, you're hearing me. We will talk about bias in some of our exercises, so let's kind of keep going through the slide. Okay, I'm borrowing some exercises from Nhg, Stanford History Education Program or Group. If you haven't used their resources, you'll probably love them, and it's free to get access. You just have to create a free account. So this is one of the foundational source analysis skills that your students are going to need to be good at doing before you send them off on their own projects. So let's take a look at this. The question, we want to analyze this painting, and here's the question I want you to answer. This painting, the first Thanksgiving, 1621, helps historians understand the relationship between the Wampanoag Indians and the Pilgrim settlers in 1621. Do you agree or disagree? Why? Go.
Ooh la la, this is going to be fun.
Disagree, says Laura.
I love doing this with history teachers because they all roll their eyes and they're like, are you kidding me?
Disagree. This is from the point of view of colonists, right? So for them, yes. Kevin says it's a romanticized look at the people. Disagree, says Laura. The painting is dated 1932. So is this a primary source for 1621? It is not, because of the date. Seriously, looking at the date is the first place you want to go. Okay, so then the conversation actually gets really a lot more interesting. What is this painting's message and what is it trying to do? What's the historical context in 1932? Sourcing, yes. What's the historical context in 1932? What is this about? Okay, Great Depression, yes. What story is this artist trying to tell about the first Thanksgiving?
The white people look like they're saving the brown people.
Good.
Good.
Right, this looks like, I like Kevin's no hostility. Kevin said romanticized, I think, or romantic view. By the time this might have happened, none would have worn those Elizabethan collars.
Nice.
Right. Okay, so if your student comes to you with a source like this, hang on, I wanted to go back and see what Gerald says. Native Americans are lower in the image, which implies being subjects to the colonists. Excellent. Excellent analysis. So what we're doing is we're analyzing this painting. We are trying to figure out what cultural work it's actually doing in 1932. So it's trying to paint a picture of no hostility, of peaceful settler relations with the native people, of unity, messages that maybe were important in the 30s, right? Only the colonists are serving the food. And tell me why that's significant. Oh, great, Gerald, the Indian Citizenship Act in the 20s. Good connection. Nice. Okay, so the point is you need to do a lot of this work with your students before they start finding their own, working with their own primary sources, because the sourcing skills are going to transfer into their project, but you can't send them out to analyze their sources if you haven't taught them how to do this. So I love Nhg's historical assessments of thinking, but if you've been on their website, you probably are already using some of their stuff. Just these are skills that can be taught, and then the students apply them through their project. Okay, Christine.
And Wendy, just a quick add on to that, whatever content you're covering, you can find it in the hats that Nhg has. So that's another important part of National History Day, is you're embedding the skills in the content you're already covering.
Exactly, thank you. And I wanted to point out another program that Nhg is offering called Civic Online Reasoning. And this is really relevant to assessing the credibility of secondary sources, especially because we know kids are going to be researching online this year almost entirely. And so I am going to go over like a 1 hour or 2 hour training in 3 minutes, and I'm going to send you to Nhg to get the full, the full program, but I think you'll get the idea. So they talk about how fact checkers use lateral reading to assess credibility. This is going to be useful working with kids if you're going to do a unit on fake news, which really also blends really well with NHD and source analysis. So instead of vertically reading the article, right, which is starting at the top and reading down and looking for signs of credibility in the article itself, what you actually do is you leave that web page and you start to populate more tabs laterally along your browser bar. And you want to look at who the author is or the publisher and immediately research in a new tab, okay, who's this person and who's this publisher and what can I find out about them? And this is where you do go to Google to find a lot of this information. Then you're going to ask, what's the evidence that they're providing? Again, you're going to research that on another page. You're not reading the actual document to assess whether it's credible. You're going to read other sources that surround that source to find out about that, the person or the organization, the evidence, and the use of, and the bias of that source. So resources that you can quickly get to help you do this: Wikipedia is good, PolitiFact, Snopes, FactCheck, basic news organizations, ABC, that kind of thing, can all provide information about these organizations or authors. So to save time, we're going to skip the exercise I was going to do. But really, this program is so amazing and really empowers kids in their social media lives and just coping with the news environment that we live in. These are such essential skills, and they build in so well with your work, training them to use secondary sources, that I wanted to make sure you knew about this resource, Civic Online Reasoning. Okay, next slide. Any questions before we move on? Okay. Let's go to the next slide. I can't remember. What's that?
We don't work for Shake. We just love them so much.
I know. I was just going to say, we used Shake last week, and we're about to use more Shake in just a second. So
it's okay. We use the Library of Congress.
We are about to use the Library of Congress, and then we're going to use a little more Shake. So I think both are really, really great ways to get kids questioning. And so in this mindset of evaluating sources, you can introduce this whole idea of really looking at a source and asking questions about a source through the Library of Congress. Their evaluating sources sheets are the best ever. I love them. NARA has some really similar ones. So if you prefer those, use those. But what I really like is the teacher's guide part, where you can walk them through. So if you happen to be in person, or you happen to have a synchronous session with your kiddos, I love, this is one of my most favorite images for kids to evaluate it, because it is rich and full of so much. It is a secondary source. It's not primary, but it is full of so much information. But more than anything, there's a lot of questions that can come up in this, in the American Progress picture, that at first glance, you don't often see it. But here is my trick to this image. And I think that this is possible to do with a zoom in, with dividing it up into like 3 pieces, doing quadrants. I like doing this one in quadrants because it's really telling. Each quadrant has some really, really specific things. So what I used to do with my students is I would break it up into quadrants, like I was saying. And so students would have I'm going to flip back and forth really quick. So students would have the primary source analysis tool, observing, reflecting, questioning. And then as a teacher, you have all of these questions here. Okay, so you're going to read these out loud. And so you have the opportunity to kind of have them zoom into just a section. And so let's just say we're going to zoom in down at this section. Hopefully you can see my mouse scrolling around, the one with the bear. We've got part of the wagon here. We've got the natives, and then we've also got the 49ers, right? And so if you're observing it, you would just have the students list everything that they see in that quadrant. And then the next step is for them to reflect on it. And reflecting is like, who made this image? What were they thinking? What was the audience? And so that kind of goes back to what we talked about with that first Thanksgiving painting as well, right? Like, what was the purpose of something in 1932? Well, 1872. Your students may not know, they may not have the content knowledge, like that historical context around it. So you may have to fill in some of that. But really the most important piece of this is asking questions about this image. What does it tell us about this time period? What does it tell us about people? And I think something that could go with this year's theme is, what does this telegraph wire tell us about how Americans felt about communication expanding west? What did it mean for Americans, right? And so the whole purpose of doing something like this is, one, for them to learn how to question a source so that they understand that not every source is gonna be perfect. It's not gonna tell them everything, and that they have to be critical of sources too, right? And so this is an exercise you can really do at any time. I was just thinking this would be such a cool exercise to even introduce History Day altogether, because then you could wrap it up with, okay, what question do you have about history? Are you questioning why X, Y, and Z happened? And then help them to dig in to the next steps of what they're actually interested in when it comes to history. So let's just take a quick minute to look at the analyzing photographs in print. So one thing that I just want to suggest is when you go to the Library of Congress website in their education section, they have a generic analyzing sources teacher's guide. But then if you keep digging into it, they also have very specific ones for media and photographs. And I think for kids who have never done this work before, I think those are really, really helpful, especially when, like Laura said, when you've got 120 who are researching different topics, it's not possible for you as a teacher to sit there and walk them through all these steps. So what I used to do is I would actually, if a student was, I would actually include these questions in their kind of like research packet. And I would say, if you're looking at a photograph, ask questions like this. If you're reading a newspaper, ask questions like this. And I got them all from here so that I didn't have to reinvent the wheel, because nobody has time for that. Like you guys are working like 14-hour days right now. Like, no. So definitely use these. I love them. I don't know if, I'm sure you all use them already, so I feel like I don't need to spend a lot of time on them. I feel like everyone uses these, but they really helped my students to dig into very specific types of resources. And then the other one that we wanted to share with you is another Nhg, because we love them. So this one is about trustworthy sources. And I love the Nhg work to do at the very beginning of the school year, or I know in the district that my children are in and that I used to teach in, we have a fall break, and oftentimes like the week before and after that fall break, the kids were super squirrely. And so I would kind of take a little bit of a hiatus from digging into some of the actual curriculum, and we would stop and do some of the Nhg work, like the lunchroom fight and all that, because it was so engaging to them that they really enjoyed it. But little did they know I was prepping them for their History Day projects, right? So this has multiple questions, and I think there's 6 examples of historical questions. And I think that's the other piece that I love about this, is that it asks historical questions. And obviously that's what they're supposed to do with their History Day project. So it's a great example of what kinds of questions we want them to be asking of sources, of history, of events in history. And then this is also just so good because they can see different types of sources. And so which one do we want to start our research with? So we'll just play this game, right? What was the layout of a Nazi concentration camp in Auschwitz? So source 1 would be an interview with an 80-year-old Holocaust survivor in 1985, or a map of the concentration camp found in the Nazi files. Which would you trust more and why? And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Laura says, I've done this, so she knows the answer.
I would be cheating. We just did this 2 weeks ago.
You just did this. Oh, I love it. I know my daughter did the snapshot autobiography in the first week of school. She's like, Mom, I have to do this snapshot autobiography. And I was like, oh man, I know what that is. She did not like me. She does not like that Mom is a social studies teacher who knows all the things her teachers are doing. Any other thoughts? So why?
Heidi says the map because the Nazis were meticulous.
Yes, but a student may not know that. So this may be an opportunity to have that conversation with them to say, well, an 80-year-old survivor, first of all, do we know that that survivor was in Auschwitz? We don't know that, right? Secondly, I mean, I hope that I have all my wits with me when I'm 80, let's be real. But this was several years after the liberation, and so memories can fade, right? So this may not be the most reliable source. However, I would never say don't read an interview or don't watch an interview with a survivor of the Holocaust. If you're doing a project on the Holocaust, you're going to learn a lot. But if you want a very specific answer, like what was the layout of a concentration camp, the map might be the best bet. But it's possible that the map could be inaccurate too. So this one is a really hard one, which is why we chose it. There's some other ones that are a little easier, like the writers of the Declaration or something like that, I think. So I highly recommend this one. If you have, if you are struggling with your students to get them to see sourcing and why we want good sources and quality sources, and that secondary and primary sources are important.
Christine, it looks like Gerald's students outwitted him in this activity.
They did?
Where, wait.
Gerald said the map and the Holocaust survivor weren't actually from Auschwitz.
Oh,
nice.
Hold on. Yes, because you're right, because the concentration camp could have been from any other concentration camp.
Excellent.
Oh
my gosh, your kids are gonna love it.
You need to turn that. You need to turn that into Nhg and tell them that the kids found an out for both sources. They need to update this document. Yeah. Oh my goodness, that's so good. Okay. Before
we move on, can I just come back, because I said we would talk about bias and then we flew past and we really did.
Okay.
So I did want to say just a couple of things about it. The word bias is so loaded, and it just continues to get more and more laden with a lot of negative connotations. And when I did a training with Nhg this summer, and we talked about that, and another historian this summer, and they talked about how if you shift the language towards perspectives and how each source shows a perspective, it can kind of help kids not think of bias as something that reduces the credibility of the source. Does that make sense? Because I think in the media climate that we exist in, right, anything that's biased loses credibility. And what we're trying to do as historians, and this is where I think, this is how I would use the lunchroom fight examples, that to me is less useful for talking about what primary sources are, and a lot useful for talking about how every student had a different perspective on that event because of where they were standing and what they saw and what their experience was. So reframing it as perspectives kind of can get them away. Implicit bias is another way of saying it, but again, I think bias is a term that might lead them to discredit sources when actually, looking at biased sources from two sides of a story. Say your students are interested in gun rights and they're going to look at the debates over the Second Amendment. Both sides are biased. It doesn't mean that they're not credible, right? So we want to move them towards perspectives. Okay.
So we blew through that. So we want to let you know that all of what we just went over is in the Canvas site. And we know that when you get to this point, when you are ready for this, that you're going to want to go back to it. So Wendy and Joanna and I were just talking about the Canvas page is not going away. Like your access to it isn't going to end. You're going to have access to it, as far as I'm concerned, through the whole school year. So everything will be there. You will have access to it. And we just want you to know that it's not going to go away, because I understand you take these courses and then like life happens and all of a sudden you're like, wait, what was that thing? So feel free to access it whenever. And there is a bunch of information about the exhibits, and it's coming out as we speak about how exhibits are going to look for this year. And that is where I'm going to give it up to Wendy, because she is more of the expert on this than I am. So we do have some examples. We have some information up there, but I know exhibits is the category that everyone has questions about, Wendy.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think exhibits is the category that is really impacted in the most complicated ways by COVID. And what the National History Day organization realized, we worked on this throughout the summer. What we realized is that every state and every community is going to be in a different place throughout the year. And we couldn't just say, everybody's going to have to do a digital exhibit. And so what we have are options. We have two options. Students can create a traditional exhibit that they build, and they use the cardboard and they cut out the paper and they, create a 3D exhibit. That is going to be accepted. But if you are attending a virtual contest, they will have to submit it to the contest through Google Slides or PowerPoint slides, where they will take pictures, and we have a template that they would use to create basically a slides presentation to display their exhibit. Now, I'm going to be the first person to tell you that this is basically what we did with exhibits last year when everybody went virtual really quickly. And there were challenges for some kids who built something really elaborate or had a lot of artifacts or just creative things that it was not just a simple trifold. It was hard for them to create images that really brought that exhibit to the judges in a holistic way. I mean, it was okay, but wasn't great. So something to keep in mind if you are going to do build from scratch physical exhibits is the simpler might be the better, because it will be reflected better if they're presenting them on slides. The other option, though, because there are a lot of places that have already made the call that every contest is going to be virtual all year. California has already made that decision. And so for places like that, if you know you're going to be in a virtual environment all year long, your students have the option of creating their exhibit in a born digital format. And they can do that using Google Draw or Canva. I mean, there are a lot of options that will make it. And NHD has created guidelines and templates that give them maximum dimensions for a born digital exhibit and what the parameters are and the smallest font they can use, and all of that has been figured out. But basically, in a nutshell, those are the two options. And so I think the considerations for you as teachers, if you already know, yes, I think you want to get that information from your coordinator. And I can tell you that we just got it. So we may not, I know I haven't sent it out to my teachers yet because it really just was completed just a while ago. Kevin, what was that question? If a student has created a physical and then a contest is virtual, no, we are not having them submit additional videos. So if they create a physical exhibit and say you have a physical contest at your local level or regional, but your state contest is virtual, they will have to create Google Slides for that. And I do want to give you one piece of important information about Google Slides. It will reduce the resolution of the photos that they put in there, and that can have an impact on how viewable the exhibit is. So you have access to PowerPoint. That does a better job handling those big photos, but just something to be aware of with Google Slides.
I would also recommend students look into Canva, and you can get you can have a free account with Canva. It doesn't have as many freebies with it, but when they're inserting photos, you can actually export as a PDF that's print quality. So it does not minimize the images. So if students are going to do a completely digital one, honestly, I guarantee they probably know about Canva because it's what most of them use to make graphics for their Instagram stories and all that kind of stuff. So likely they may already know about it, but I would highly recommend that because it's print quality. And so if they wind up having an in-person contest or they want to save it for any reason, it's going to be a high enough quality and resolution. And then you can always import it into Google. That's what, and if you have a higher version of paid version of Canva, so if like a parent has one, you can actually, multiple people can edit a document on Canva. If anybody has questions about Canva, I use it every single day, and you're more than welcome to reach out if you have students who want to use it or you want to try it yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, there's a little bit of pros and cons to each, because we don't know whether Nationals is going to be virtual or physical, and we probably won't know that until January. So it's possible, or I guess have in your mind that whatever way they create it, they may be converting it to the other format at some point in the year if they advance up several levels. I guess that's the best way I can explain it.
Yeah, we just want you to know that we've worked really hard to make the contests equitable and accessible by as many students as possible. So if you have specific concerns about students not having reliable internet access or not being able to get the supplies they need to build their exhibit, definitely reach out to your coordinator, because we're here to help you problem solve, and we have access to resources that we can help make whatever your students are doing successful this year.
And the examples that we provided for exhibits showed you one of each type. So one showed you a physical submitted on Google Slides, and one showed you a born digital that kind of comes as one PDF that then the judges kind of zoom in and scan around it. So that's what I have to say about those.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, you guys, for joining us today. Now is the time to ask questions. If you don't have any questions, you're welcome to hop off, but Christine and Wendy, yep, we'll stay on and answer questions, and we just thank you so much for joining us, and we're cheering for you out there. Keep fighting the good fight.
I have one quick question.
Yep.
I don't plan on having the kids participate in the contest this year, just for numerous reasons. I really want to work through the kinks myself and feel like I'm
totally.
Would you recommend though that I mimic as much of it as possible? So if there are limitations and there are resources that you should use and how you put your PowerPoint together, that I should do all those same things?
Will your students be competing across multiple grades or doing NHD across multiple grades?
I would use it more as like an exhibition, more as a way for them to be sharing, and then maybe we're inviting some other classes or some other schools or however it may lay out to participate. But I think I would.
You're thinking about doing it. You're thinking about doing it later in the spring, right?
I would probably try to get it started after we came back, like you guys do.
Okay. I mean, I would definitely at least recommend sort of doing some sort of showcase in school. We used to do an evening showcase at my school where we invited all the parents and everything. Obviously this year, you guys are probably not allowed to have parents in the school like that, where you have hundreds of people in a school. I highly doubt that Governor Sisolak's going to allow that one. But you could do a virtual showcase. I mean, that would be really, really cool. And so I think regardless, definitely have them walk through the process as though they're still showcasing something, because that gives them that kind of buy-in at the end. That's what I would do. I mean, very few of my students ever decided to go to state, and basically what I would do oftentimes is I would just leave it up to the students and say, do you want to take it to this next level? So like here for us in Nevada, our contest is not going to be until like early mid-April. So if you wind up doing it earlier in the year than you planned, and you do have some students that are like, yes, I love this, like you can always like give them the option, but you don't have to like go through the motions of like sort of being like, we're going to state kind of a thing. I think that's totally reasonable the first year or two that you do this.
Thanks, Laura. Thank you.
Oh, he just wanted to be on the tropical island with you.
My house is going through renovation.
Oh,
so this is what this is where I wish I were.
yeah, I know. I remember you had that during the summer program too, and I was jealous.
Oh, it's still, and probably still in the winter.
Well, thanks, Laura. Does anybody have any questions?
I had a question on the exhibit. So you guys were talking about Canvas Canva.
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering sort of how far can I go? I've had students make magazines. I've had students make big infographics. But when I see the examples online, it seems like they're mostly trifolds. They're really cool looking trifolds.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just wondering, like, what's the limitation for what they can do for the exhibit?
So, Gerald, in the contest rule book, we have specific size dimensions of what students are allowed to construct.
Okay.
Definitely, it doesn't have to be a trifold. We've seen all kinds of unique shapes and sizes. One year we had a kid whose exhibit was the symbol for Prince, the artist formerly known as Prince. He built a wooden symbol of Prince and then made that his exhibit. Anyway, cool kid. But basically the sky's the limit on their imagination.
Yeah, I've had Mickey Mouse ears before. I've seen globes. So as far as the in-person, I've seen all sorts of creative stuff. I would say on Canva, probably the easiest thing for them to do is just like the digital, like Google Slides. There's a presentation. There's presentation templates.
Wait. I'm going to stop you. It's actually been clearly designated for the born digital exhibits. If they make them born digital on Google Draw or Canva, there are specific dimensions that they have to meet.
Yeah, they have
different from what's in the rule book, because the rule book describes like a cube of area on a table.
Which is not digital. Yeah.
It's not, it won't apply for a born digital exhibit. But in the instructions for it all that we'll send out to you, it'll be delineated.
Yeah, they're specific dimensions, and then they can create whatever whatever fits within the dimensions. And we have a few examples to show you, but for sure encourage their creativity and their free thinking and what they feel like is a great way to showcase their argument, their historical argument. Does that make sense? You're muted.
Yes, it does. It makes sense.
Awesome. Do you have any other questions, Gerald?
Yeah, this is my first time here, and so and now we just started teaching this week, so I'm getting the ball rolling. And since this is my first year, I'm definitely like, oh my gosh, what have I gotten into? And I'm excited, but also I don't know what I'm doing most of the time.
I saw your email. I saw your email to me this evening with 2 questions.
Right, and I got that. I got the reply.
Okay, great. Keep asking though. Don't be shy. Everyone's first year is a roller coaster, and you're riding a roller coaster on a roller coaster every year.
That's a good way of putting it. I did today. I contacted the Lateral County, the county I'm in, the Historical Society, and the person who oversees it. I can't remember what his title is exactly. Just the local historian. He actually served as a judge on National History Day before. So I'm going to try to get him connected to the senior division, since my school, I think, is the only school in our region. And so I think I'm going to have like 120, that's how many students I have that are just going to do a presentation. And I'm not exactly sure like if I should put it on, or you were talking about virtual. I'm trying to think of how to do that. So maybe parents could get involved, because I definitely want to showcase as you were talking about. So
showcasing is a great way to help get students involved. I can help you set up a virtual showcase where you're kind of publishing a website through Google that shows off each of your students' projects. In terms of the regional contest, you are not the only school in the region, but you are the only senior division school. So you may as well be, I guess. But we will run the contest out of my office. So you get to just like register your kids, bring them to the contest, and then we've recruited all of the judges, and we handle the judging side of it. So,
okay, so I won't have to worry about that.
Yeah, so you don't have to worry about
cross
that.
that off your to-do list. You don't
Okay,
have to do
good,
that.
done.
Good news.
Not your job.
Okay, okay.
So that's something exciting.
Yeah.
Yay!
In a regular year, I would definitely say like host a parent night at your school and let the kids show off their work. At a contest, they kind of get, in a typical contest year, parents are invited and they get to come and see all the projects and see other kids' projects. But for this year, they won't be able to at the regional level. We still haven't decided if the state contest will be virtual or not. We're going to wait until after the holidays to decide.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
You have no problem. Keep asking the questions.
I definitely will.
I'll do it for you. Awesome. Thanks, Gerald. Renee, did you have any questions or anyone else? You're not Nicole, Heidi.
Actually, a question about documentaries.
We can't hear you, Nicole.
Yeah.
Nicole, try again.
Yeah.
I swear, everybody that has AirPods on Zoom, they just don't work. I don't get it.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so weird. And I
Do
use the
they
AirPods.
work when you're teaching class?
We don't use Zoom. We have to use Google
Oh,
Meet.
that's right.
CCSD is like, they have to be different.
I know.
I had a question about, for the documentaries, when they have to get interviews, my kids always seem to have like a really hard time. They like reach out to UNLV professors, they reach out to authors, and like they just don't get responses. So I'm wondering if maybe you guys have kind of gone through that and maybe have some resources or some maybe ways to get people to actually give them interviews.
I mean, I can barely get people to respond to me. I mean, Nicole, I can tell you that we're small enough here that if your students want my help with reaching out to people, I'm happy to help, because we're still small enough that I don't have the thousands of kiddos that Wendy and Johanna have. So I can offer that. If they're struggling to get a hold of somebody, like I have some contacts at UNLV specifically, and then in some other places, that if I reach out to like this person and say, hey, can you help this person? Can you ask this person to respond to this student? I think that's probably the best bet that we can do, is if they've been reaching out to someone at, the Hoover Dam Museum and that person's not responding, I know somebody at the State Museum that can help us get a hold of somebody there. I think this year it's going to be exceptionally hard because nobody's at their actual offices.
Yeah. I just know that it's like the student-made interviews are so much more impactful than, because then they usually have to go the route of like for the recorded, already like pre-made one. And I've had some students that have been successful, but it's like context through their parents.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Like I had a student last year, she went to nationals, and she did hers, and her dad actually, cancer doctor, was willing to sit down and talk about.
Hers was awesome. Yes.
Yeah, so like that was cool. And I think it's really impactful, but I have a lot of kids who they're like, I keep on emailing and I keep on trying, and I'm like, oh, sorry.
Sometimes it's also picking up the actual telephone, because some of the older professors and stuff, they're a little old school and they don't even check their email.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about you, but my email's overflowing, and so I'm sure a professor is too, but I'm happy to help with that. So, if that's a struggle, like let me know and we can figure out. I mean, I don't know people at like the Smithsonian, but if it's a local thing, at least we can find someone at UNR or UNLV as a start. And then if not, then I can always reach out to the other affiliate coordinators and say, hey, I have a student doing this project, can you help me? Like, who would I even contact at this museum? That kind of thing. That helps to have that network. So, when we get to that point. And then what I did last year is a few kids didn't have the ability to do it on their own. So I would recommend having them record a Zoom and record it in speaker mode, because then they can pull that digitally into their documentary or insert it into their exhibit or whatever.
Okay. Yeah, because my students, so my honors students are starting in October.
Okay.
So they're just like, right now we're talking about topics and coming up with like kind of what you would be, like what your focus kind of thing. But then I teach Jumpstart, which is through the local college. I'm also making them do it. They just don't know it yet. So right now they're writing a research paper, and then I'm going to be like, so
let's take the next step. No, that's awesome.
Do something else kind of thing. So.
Yeah, well, you have until April, because I pushed back with all the spring breaks and sort of up in the air. I just pushed it back to April 10th, I think. So
okay, which is perfect. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, who knows what our districts are doing here? So
they don't even know.
No, they don't know. They don't. Apparently, there's a board meeting happening.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anybody else have a question? Don't be shy.
I have to go, but it was good seeing everybody.
Thank you.
For the first time. And yeah, hopefully I'll be able to make the rest of the meetings. This has been an insane last 2 weeks. So yeah.
Oh, we get it. Everything's been recorded and it's all on the Canvas site. So definitely make sure you set up your account and you'll be able to get all the information.
Yep, and I watched the first one. I'm halfway through the second one, so I'm getting there. Good. All right, see you guys.
Thank you.
Bye. All right. I think Renee and Heidi have just got us on, but they're like doing the dishes or something.
Yeah, I'm going to put them in the waiting room. There we go. I don't think they were actually there.
Yeah.
I think they're just.
Weren't they the two last time?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I think so.
Heidi works with me. She's just on because she likes to join.
Oh, that's very sweet. She's just
so sweet.
Kind of watching. I think that went well, even though we wound up having to do a little backwards. I actually think the order worked better.
I do too.
I think it did, yeah.
It worked better.
I think it kind of flowed really well. Oh, I can stop recording. Whoops.
It was totally fun.